Welcome again. Good morning, good afternoon for some. Welcome to Beyond Compliance. My name is Aaron Bolshaw with SafetyChain Software. I'm the moderator of Beyond Compliance. Some of you are coming in for the first time, and so we welcome you. And our goal here with Beyond Compliance is just a periodic industry update for process manufacturers. The goal to bring you insights around the market that shape the way we grow our businesses, deliver quality products to customers, mitigate supply chain risks, safeguard brands, and in the spirit of truly going beyond the compliance world, we are focusing on improving yields and maximizing productivity, which is really the gist of today. We're exploring lean principles to reduce waste, add value, and this is a really interesting concept. So grab a hold of your seats. You're going to like the way that we go through this, and then also build operational excellence really into all of your processes. So we've got with us today Michael Parent of Michael Parent Consulting Services with us. Very happy to have him aboard again. I'll introduce him in just a second. For today, very quickly about SafetyChain. It's the #1 plant management platform uniting compliance, safety, quality, and production. We live all the way across the plant floor in over 1,500 facilities, and actually we're past 2,000 now. We got to do something about that. So with that, a couple of things to get us started. Everyone should be able to hear us. Some people may not. We advise if you do have any problems, call into that number, but we can't hear you. So if you're yelling and shouting at us, we can't hear you. We do want to hear from you though. So through the presentation, as you have questions, maybe there's some specific things about your facility you want to know about, these lean principles. How do I add value here in my processes? We want to get those. Those are some of the most valuable pieces that we can deliver in these sessions. We're going to save those to the end of the presentation. That'll give Michael time to get through the whole thing, and then we'll dive into those questions afterwards. Okay. We're also going to be doing a couple of polls throughout the presentation, so stay sharp. We're going to start asking you some questions as well. All right, with that, Michael Parent, MBA, Michael Parent Consulting Services, Bachelor of Science in Industrial and Operations, University of Michigan, very astute school. And then his MBA there, William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He got the 40 under 40 Rising Star by the American Society for Quality. So ASQ recognized his talent very early. And he is also the author of Lean Innovation Cycle, a multidisciplinary framework for designing value with lean and human-centered design, which is really interesting, Michael, because we often talk about like, hey, there's these machines we've got to operate really well and get, tuned up, and we talk about OEE and all these things, but it's really the interface between how the humans and the machines are working and how, we call it like, how do you get the human collected data and that machine data to work harmoniously and in a way that you can operate your business better. So really appreciate you being here again with us on Beyond Compliance. Welcome, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And I think we'll have a little bit to say about, the human element in some of the conversation today.
Yeah, definitely. Well, why don't we just jump into it, Michael? We've got a couple of things here. Why don't you take over? What are we getting into today?
Yeah, so what we're going to look at is really one of the fundamental principles of Lean and Six Sigma. So when we talk about operational excellence, we're talking about kind of these problem-solving frameworks that are kind of collectively called Lean and Six Sigma. And one of the key facets of this is these principles of removing waste from our operations. So we want to first kind of name what waste is and how they appear, how wastes show up in our operations. Then we'll talk about actually finding the waste and methods that I use to go into processes, into manufacturing plants, and actually identify these wastes as they're occurring on the factory floor or in some admin operation. And then really, I think kind of the most value added part of this conversation is, okay, so I found these wastes, I know what they are, what do I do about them? How do I get them out of my process? So we'll discuss kind of some methods on approaching those sorts of wastes as well and getting them out of our operations. So we call them the 8 wastes, and essentially I use this fun little anagram called downtime, and it's very helpful because in order to avoid downtime, we just have to find downtime. And we'll go through these step by step, but essentially downtime stands for defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and extra processing. And in all of these things, we're categorizing all of these as non-value added and wasteful activities. So let's talk about those. I think the first one makes the most sense, or it makes kind of intuitive sense, right? Is anytime we create a product that is not ideal the first pass, the first time, it's a defect. So to the top right here, I once worked in a manufacturing facility that made tires. We had lots of curing issues. So as these tires are getting pressed with really heavy pressure presses and steam and all this stuff, we're getting defects that can affect the safety and integrity and the quality of these tires. So that's a defect. We'll have to rework that, and that is a waste. We're not utilizing our operations as efficiently as we could be. And you can see the example of the water bottle below it as well. It's some kind of things that one looks like it actually got to the actual customer. And now the customer is experiencing something other than the ideal product. And then, of course, this doesn't just transpire in manufacturing, but certainly software. We've all run into software bugs, things not working properly, IT issues I have all the time. And essentially, we could categorize every single one of these issues as a type of defect. So that's the first one. The second one we call overproduction, and we also say that this is the deadliest of the wastes because it leads to all the other wastes. The classic example of this is the bottom left here. This is, a parking lot, and I'm from Detroit, Michigan, so we have tons of these parking lots. This is like a GM parking lot where they've produced all of these vehicles to get the cost per vehicle down through mass production, but now they're sitting on these lots. They are, they've got the elements hitting them in the winter, in the hot sun. And now about this time of year, they're looking at the new model years and they're saying, I've got to get all these cars off my lot. So now they're discounting them and selling them. So this is a classic case of overproduction, where they've actually produced too much, but it can also be the case that what overproduction looks like is ordering too much of something. So the top right here, something happened in the supermarket, it has a short shelf life, this beef does, and because of that, now they've ordered too much of it. They're just trying to get it out of the door before it spoils, and they tag this manager special saying, just get it out of there. And then, of course, even in healthcare, sometimes we're ordering too many particular types of tests or what have you. All of this would be considered overproduction, and it's wasteful. We rather be doing more with less. We rather have a customer at the end of that process ready to receive the product rather than just building an anticipation for it. Waiting, I think, is really intuitive for why it's wasteful. We all have seen probably the news cycles of container ships out in the San Francisco Bay or in the Galveston Bay just sitting idly. They're not transporting materials. They're not unloading materials. It's a waste, right? We could be utilizing these assets in other ways. And even if we think about like a race car driver, the pit stop, though it's necessary, I'm not disagreeing that it's necessary. You got to change those tires, you got to fill the tank, but they're waiting. They're not racing at this moment, and obviously they're trying to minimize that time as much as possible. And then to round out the top four here of the downtime anagram, this is kind of that human element we talked about, Aaron, where we've got this ineffective use of capital, and of human capital, excuse me, and I find this most common in manufacturing, where we have somebody working a machine, that's their job task, but we don't have systems in place to get them to identify areas of improvement. And indeed, these are the people we need to have identifying these areas of improvement because they are the process experts. They are the most intimate with the machines. They have the most intimate knowledge of these machines, and they're going to be the ones who will actually live into the solutions that they come up with themselves. So it's a lot easier to get buy-in if the ideas are coming from the bottom up rather than from the top down. So that's the first four of the downtime anagram. The second four, I think, get a little bit more controversial. So the first one is transportation. Anytime we move a product for any reason is a transportation waste. So that might seem kind of, there might be counterexamples that you can think of, like, well, I pay for Amazon Prime and I got my packages in 2 days and that's value added to me. But I would grant you that's fair. But I would also grant that you don't care whether or not that product traveled 5 miles or 500 miles to you. You simply care that it arrived at your doorstep and you're paying for the convenience, but you're actually not paying for that transportation. So transportation is a waste because it takes up resources, it takes up time to transport from A to B, and even in some cases, if you're looking at an actual manufacturing facility, you might have to have a larger facility. If you've ever priced out how much a conveyor costs, it's incredibly expensive to have something like this of a conveyor belt system. So it's really capitally intensive when you start looking at the resources that have to go into transporting products from point A to point B. Now, the other really controversial one is inventory. And particularly if you have an accounting or a finance background, you're going to say, hold on. Inventory is an asset. I can go look at a balance sheet and I can tell you that my balance sheet looks a lot better when I've got more inventory because it's hitting my asset side of things rather than my liabilities. In operations, we don't feel the same way about it because it actually feels like a liability for operations folks. If your inventory has a shelf life, like we see in the supermarket, you've got to keep the stuff cool, you've got to make sure it doesn't expire, and then you've got to take care of it if you don't sell it all. Likewise, you're going to have to be wary of product getting damaged while it's actually sitting in the warehouse or in the docking bay or what have you, and in this instance. And then it also ties up a lot of capital. Not only have you purchased the raw materials that might be sitting in inventory, or you've conferred value in the process and you've got finished goods sitting there. You've got, our companies don't live on a cash basis. We're financing this money. So there's this time value of money that we have to pay back. And if it's just sitting there in idle inventory, we're not being effective stewards of that money. And then, of course, if you're looking for the Ark of the Covenant in the 1930s or whatever, you've got these extra land resources, extra warehouses that you have to build. That's all of this is tied up in inventory, which is kind of why we see it as a waste. Another intuitive one, so transportation and inventory, I would say, are kind of the two most controversial ones. Motion waste, I think, is relatively straightforward. Anytime, it's a lot like transportation. Anytime we're moving from point A to point B, but with kind of smaller motions, a lot of human element motions. And this includes searching for information, searching for tools. I work with a lot of admin processes, and you wouldn't believe, these people have to open up PDF files and go and then look for a number on a PDF file and then put it in their Apple calculator. All of this is just small, tiny motion waste that if you can get the right file format, you can automate it and just eliminate all of this waste. And then the last part in the downtime anagram is this idea of extra processing. Extra processing is anything that we do that we think is conferring value to a product, but is actually something the customer is not willing to pay for. The classic example is polishing a cannonball. Why do you not polish a cannonball? Well, because there's no utility in a polished cannonball. I can do the exact same damage with a polished cannonball as I can with an unpolished one. And what this looks like in some admin processes as well may look something like extra approvals. So this is something that we did where there were a lot of different approvals for an employee relations discipline process. In each of these instances, we weren't really adding any value. We were just kind of pushing paper and doing some extra processing. So certainly this takes place in admin processes, and it also takes place in kind of manufacturing, traditional manufacturing environments as well. So I have a 2-minute video that I want to show all of you to really get the idea of what it looks like when you have a lot of waste in a system and what it looks like when you don't have a waste. So this is a 1950s pit stop, and then a more 21st century pit stop.
This will be fun.
But Holland comes in for a pit stop. Time to refuel and change tires. Moore himself changes the tires.
He's hammering.
Only 4 crew members, including the driver, are allowed to work on the car. It's a tense time. Holland stays in his seat, anxious to get away. Let's watch.
Oh my gosh. Oh, this is painful.
Yeah.
all I keep hearing, Michael, is all these like the other cars passing by. Anybody's into NASCAR, this is killing me right now. Oh my. One tire on. I mean, at this point, is he having a snack? He's having a little cup of tea?
The tires are changed at last. A crewman polishes the windshield as Holland moved away just 67 seconds after he stopped.
Just 67 seconds. Aren't these things like...
Go ahead, Aaron.
No, do you have another one? Do you have the now what it looks like?
Yeah, I sure do. But if we can stop here and think about it, right? Like we saw a lot of motion, we saw a lot of non-utilized talent. The driver wasn't doing a whole lot. My favorite is the extra processing where he's spending time to wipe down the windshield. It's just, why? So, now we're going to get something from 2013. And no.
Actually, if you go, is this the before today? Right, if we go like this, right? Do we see it? Let me see here. If we go,
you got it. You got it, Aaron. A little bit faster, louder cars as well. So just a little faster, and you can see that in a race where seconds are the difference between winning and losing. Certainly what they've done differently. Yes, they've got more people there, but they've also modified a lot of the procedures that they have. There's no non-utilized talent. There's no motion wastes. These people are watching this film and trying to correct these motions, similar to how football players watch film on their offense and defense. So it's kind of a case study in eliminating motion or eliminating wastes from the process.
Yeah, that's I mean it's a marvel to see how quickly that all works. That guy kept hammering away at the wheel like, oh my gosh,
right.
Is that a wheel off? Jeepers. All right, well, let's get everyone's attention here back into the game. I'm going to ask a question really quick. Wanted to get everyone as best as possible to answer, what approaches are you using right now to identify and resolve immediate issues? So I'm going to launch this. Everybody in front of your screen should be seeing that. And you want to select one or more of the following things. We got, committee. Hey, let's get together and talk about it, right? Maybe sometimes you look at piloting a solution. Do you itemize implementation plans, or are you using further analysis? Now, we don't have anybody voting yet. That tells me everyone's kind of scared. Let's look at this and just kind of pick some. There, we got one. All right. Again, we're not taking your name. We're not taking, this is just to give us a good framework to have this discussion through the rest of Beyond Compliance. It also gives you all a good sort of basis to understand who else is in the room. We had, I think, 350 or so people register for this. So this is a good N factor, right? We've got it. We want a good data set, as they say. We've got about a quarter of the people voting. I see some stuff coming through. Any in your experience, Michael, what are you seeing most often across these four?
I think it depends. I look at further analysis, and I think there's a time and place for that, particularly when you have kind of pervasive and difficult strategic issues that you're facing. But I myself like the piloting a solution. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But there's a great book called In Search of Excellence, which is probably from the late 70s, early 80s. Two McKinsey consultants write a book on what good companies do, and they have this bias towards action is one of the things good companies do. So I think we tend to run into the analysis paralysis. And I rather, let's get our hands dirty, try something and see what happens.
Yeah, that ends up being a better way in general if you have a culture that accepts quick failures early and iterative processes instead of looking and searching for the big, proverbial silver bullet, right? If you have an organization that is more agile, that says, hey, it's okay to take smaller steps, but continue to take those smaller steps, we also call this continuous improvement, right? Those lead to hands down better business outcomes in the long run.
Right. And we were talking about human-centered design beforehand. There's a
Yeah.
huge component of that called prototyping and low resolution prototyping. And I think that plays nicely into what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, sometimes paper mocks, the prototyping process has gotten so sophisticated now. Those early prototypes are so important to help understand how does this thing fit physically into the world as a solution.
Mhm.
I love early sort of breakdown type prototypes that help speed up that early learning, right? So
Yeah.
we get a lot of people in committee, and then kind of across the board, piloting, itemizing, implementation plan, excuse me, and then further analysis. Any comments here, Michael?
Committee does not surprise me. I think that's how a lot of people operate. I have my own theories on why that might be, but I think itemized implementation plans are great, and I use them often, and I think those are really, really powerful tools, and I highly recommend anybody who's not familiar with them to check them out. I don't talk about them in this presentation, but they're certainly high quality tools.
Yeah, definitely. Very good. All right, well, let's head on. This is part that we're working on this, Michael. This is really fascinating. Why don't you get into this value added stuff here?
Yeah, so we kind of started with talking about the wastes as kind of their own categories, but they actually kind of play into this larger hierarchy of activities that are value added and not value added. So if we take this pit stop example, well, I guess I'll say value added is anything that the customer is willing to pay for. If you think about your manufacturing process or something, at each stage in the game, you're adding value that the customer is ultimately willing to pay for. But you're also doing things like the 8 wastes that we just talked about that are not necessarily adding value. The pit stop is a great example. Is it necessary? Yes, you got to change those tires. They're not going to go 500 miles in Indianapolis, but you got to refuel the tank. But they're not adding value. At the end of the day, I'm not getting around the track faster because of that pit stop. In fact, it's slowing me down. So we kind of have this matrix where we have things that are value added, things that are not value added, things that are necessary, even though they might not be value added, and things that are unnecessary. So the matrix, I think, is relatively intuitive. If it's value added and it's necessary, great. Try to improve it faster, stronger, more efficient. This is, essentially performance metrics. We want to get better at what we're doing. If it's not value added and it's unnecessary, we got to knock it off. We got to find a way to stop doing it because it's not helping us be effective, lean, efficient, whatever you want to call it. Now, kind of the issue is when you have things that are non-value added, but it's necessary. Reporting, your annual reports to the SEC is really, really, really important, but it doesn't actually add value to the customers who are buying the products. So in this case, you would want to minimize this process as much as possible, because it would be better to be able to do all of your reporting in 5 minutes versus five months, right? So in this case, we don't lose anything by making it faster and minimizing it, so long as we're meeting the requirements. What's interesting now, though, is if we have something that we've identified as value but is unnecessary. So this could either be a new innovation that we've identified. Well, hey, the customer is not really, they're not familiar with this, but they're willing to pay for it. In which case, we would move it into this green box here. If we determine that it's unnecessary and maybe it's extra processing, we should stop doing it. We should cut it out. So this is kind of more of a judgment call based on a case-by-case basis. And I'll finally say on this slide that when we talk about non-value added versus value added, 20% is world-class. 20% is like 1 out of every 5 minutes we're actively doing something that confers value, which also means that the other 4 minutes you're doing a waste. You're transporting the product, you're having motion waste. 20% wrench time is actually pretty good, and Toyota kind of hits this benchmark. But if you went and did kind of this analysis yourself, don't get discouraged if you see, hey, we're actually only 5% value added. That's probably a good starting point, to be honest. So that's just kind of where the that's how hard it is. We're never going to be 100%, but that's all right. We can still improve. So now we've talked about what the wastes are. We've talked about value added and non-value added. How do we actually find waste in our organizations on the manufacturing floor? The first thing that I like to do every single time is create a process map. And I like to do this for a number of reasons, but one of the most important is you get a bunch of people in the room and they're all going to have different ideas about what the process map should look like. And in so doing and deliberating all of this, you're going to find inconsistencies, and they're already going to be discussing wastes within this process map. Oh, we actually have, after step 3, we have to go back to step 1 if something's not correct. Well, that's a potential for a defect, and we've already identified a waste. There may be, motion waste, weighting wastes through each of these process steps. So just by deliberating and getting a process map in front of people, we can already identify wastes. Now, this is just an example that I'm going to use in another slide here of somebody in employee relations who essentially they were doing a process improvement, a waste reduction activity where they were looking at the reasonable suspicion process. So unfortunately, a manager believes that somebody might be under the influence of a substance at work. What process steps do they take to get them screened for a drug test? Now, the next thing you can do, let's say you have that process map, you can actually go to in Lean what we call the Gemba, go where the work is being done. So I like to go and actually observe the process. This is very kind of scientific. It's very empirical. I have to actually go and see what's going on. So when I do this, I love to start from the finished product, start in the warehouse, and you work your way back through the manufacturing plant, through that value chain, because that way you can kind of see when things start to pop up in quality inspection. Hey, we're finding issues in our widgets. Well, that's where you're finding them, but where are they actually starting? And you can kind of play detective and work your way back upstream to understand how these defects, in point A of the process might be affecting point B, C, and D. Now, I have these sticky notes here. I have actual sticky notes that I bring with me, and when I see a waste, I will put that on my process map as I'm walking the floor to say, I've identified this type of waste at this process step. Now we're in a virtual space, so I don't actually have these, but they might look something like this. And this is, a team of HR specialists that I've essentially coached to do that exact same thing. So they have the reasonable suspicion process. They have documented and measured the times of each process step. And they've actually gone through and done a waste, we might call it a waste criticism of each of their process steps. And now we say, aha, there's a lot of weighting. We can see that's the green ones. We see there's some transportation wastes. We see there's some defects that might happen. There's some non-utilized talent and extra processing. Great, fantastic. So now we've identified waste. We've located exactly where it is and perhaps even quantified the impact that it's having on our organization. What we can do now, I guess there's kind of 2 approaches to this. We can either attack the process step that has the most waste or the most impact on our process, and say that's the one we're going to start with. I also like to start upstream for the reasons we were kind of mentioning. Is if you can attack something that's upstream as much as possible, you might not be able to quantify it, but it's going to have implications later on. And if you're getting things right the first time over here, things are going to work themselves out down here. And that's just kind of a testament of faith. I don't really have any hard data to back that up. It's just some stuff I've seen in my life. So definitely, I like to start as far up in the upstream in the process as possible.
Well, and this really does, if you go back really quick, Michael, it really does. You don't have data to support this, but if you start to mature your processes and systems to a point where you're able to see real-time data, this you will see very quickly, because absolutely what happens is as you become more aware of issues happening earlier in this process, and you're able to make adjustments, sometimes just small adjustments on the shift, on that line, on that batch, whatever, you're going to see huge results in your overall productivity and yield, because you're catching things quickly, and that real-time access to data and information helps operators to really control the process better, start to finish, and all that downstream stuff that you would normally not see until it gets to you can fix before it gets there. So there's absolutely validity to that. I'm with you. You don't need scientific data for, in my opinion, Michael, this is truth.
Well, thanks. I think we could write a book sometime. I'm going to speed up a little bit, Aaron, because I got a lot of slides to get through. But we talked a little bit about the committee as an opportunity for improvement, or that's how we improve. We just talked about finding the waste. What do we actually do? How do we remove it? First thing is you can just remove it, right? We had that little matrix that said, hey, just knock it off. Stop doing the waste. Sometimes you don't need anything more elegant than that. So the Ross Perot quote, if you see a snake, just kill it. Don't appoint a committee on snakes. We have this anagram that I use. I call it El Camore: eliminate, combine, modify, reduce. It's best to eliminate the waste entirely if you can. If you cannot eliminate the waste entirely, try combining it with a value added activity so that the wasteful activity is masked. If not, try modifying something, and then it's still good. Any improvement is an improvement. If you can reduce the waste at all, that's great as well. And I think the pit stop example is really indicative of kind of this modify and reduce. Of they didn't eliminate the pit stops, they didn't combine it with anything. I mean, the guy still has to stop racing. They have to get off the track and go to pit lane, but they certainly did a lot to modify and reduce the wastes, and that had a delta of 66 seconds, I think. So that's if you kind of know what's going on. What if you don't know what's causing an issue? Say, yeah, well that's great, but the reason I'm creating defects is because I don't know why I'm creating defects. I don't know what the root cause of that is. Well, we have this thing called PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, and it's all about experimentation. It's all about breaking a few eggs to make an omelet and figuring out what we didn't know before. So we're not going to be afraid to make mistakes in this, but if we can use this framework of trying new things in a deliberate way, we can really learn a lot about our processes, the factors that affect them, and the best practices that we can put in place. So my good friend Arthur Franzarelli helps me out here with PDCA. But essentially what you want to do is figure out what you're willing to test. There's some more elegant tools that we might call design of experiment, but let's say I'm interested in finding out different temperature settings for manufacturing my widget, or different dwell timers, machine timers, or different inventory levels. I don't want to have as much inventory in my factory or what have you. So we're going to figure out what it is we're willing to change. We're going to make the changes. Then we're going to monitor, and Aaron, as you just mentioned, if you have a real-time system, it's a lot easier to monitor and see the impact that you're having. And then if the impact is positive and that's what you wanted, you can update the standard. And it's very, very important to update the standard because without it, you really don't know why that best practice was in place, and you'll probably slip back into your former ways. I'll also briefly mention that when doing this, it's best just to do one. Don't change the temperature settings, the dwell timers, and the inventory levels all at once. We're just, and it doesn't have to work. We just have to figure out what these, what the factors are that are affecting our processes and our wastes. So when we're looking at standards, it's very, very important. This is called the Deming cycle, and essentially we do the PDCA, like we just mentioned. But then in order to continue to improve, we kind of have to have the standard in place to help us from backsliding. So the standard is really, really important to saying like, hey, well, we changed this thing. How did we communicate it? How did we train new folks on it? How did we ensure that in 30, 60, 90 days, we're still adhering to the new best practice? Creating standards for communication, for training, and for methodology execution is really, really vitally important. You really haven't done anything until you've updated the standard. for this kind of improvement. Back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so another cool poll question. We'll rip through this one real quick. Just in your best opinion, this is an opinion-based poll. Excuse me, as I pull this up, excuse me. What, how developed is your organization's lean culture? We like to ask these maturity questions just to give us a sense of, okay, where are we at? Where's everyone, in our room right now at? And, just be honest, just pick one of these and that best describes where you are, right? How developed is your organization's lean culture? Not really working, just getting by, pretty good, right? You feel good about this, or stellar? Be honest here. We want to get a couple of people voting here. I don't know. And again, honesty is like where we want to just kind of get a good benchmark across this group. We're doing this just so you can see where you kind of compare with, like I said, hundreds of other folks that you've never met that are online that are kind of in here. So we got about 50% voting. I'm going to guess we're going to see a bit of a ramp curve here, not like necessarily your standard deviation, Michael, something that starts out low, but the curve kind of goes up in the middle somewhere. But I'm going to close this off. Let's take a look at the results. What are your thoughts here?
I thought just getting by would be the highest, and I'm assuming that a lot of our folks on here are from manufacturing, and I think in 21st century, you're not going to go into a manufacturing facility without some semblance of lean manufacturing, lean culture built into it. So I'm not surprised by that. I anticipated that. I'm sorry to see that nobody thinks it's stellar. I think it's very, very difficult to be stellar. I think very few can be great. So difficult, but unfortunately that's where we are. Not really working. Yeah, that's too bad. But I would anticipate that most people have some semblance of lean methods and culture in their workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, next up, 5S's. Why don't you take us through this?
Yeah, so 5S is actually a really good place to start. Great transition for those who are kind of just getting by or not, starting on their lean journey. So essentially what I wanted to do is say, hey, we've talked about ways to eliminate waste. We've talked about, by just going and doing it, by doing a PDCA. These are actually some concrete tools that we use as Lean Six Sigma practitioners to actually eliminate waste. The first one is 5S, and this is kind of like fundamental Lean Six Sigma stuff, is we've got to have a clean workspace. We've got to have elements of visual management, and without doing that, without kind of setting that standard, it's very, very difficult to actually improve anything because you're just not going to have the stability to do it. So 5S is a great way to clean your workstation and gain that visual management and stability that you need to continue to improve. Briefly, what you would do in a 5S activity is you would first identify the things that you actually don't even need in the workstation, and then you get rid of them. Secondly, is you would set them in order. We have this thing that I like to say, a place for everything and everything in its place. So these widgets here, they all have labels and it's the correct widgets. Then we kind of clean it up, shine, we add visual management to say where things belong within the workstation. We standardize it, of course, we always standardize it, and then that helps us sustain. So we're continuing to keep this up and maintain the new standard. Briefly, this attacks 3 different types of wastes. Inventory. If you know what you have, you don't have to have excessive inventory because you can be more prescriptive on your inventory orders, and you're just going to be more aware of where things are. Movement wastes, this is like textbook reducing movement waste. If you don't have to search for things, if things are in a clean workspace, if you know exactly where that trash can is or that tool is, you're going to decrease the movement waste. And then defects, because there's a place for everything and everything is in its place, we're going to reduce the probability of putting the wrong piece on the thing that we're assembling or using the wrong wrench or what have you, the wrong torque setting. And so by doing that, you're decreasing some of the chances of defects. So the best practitioner of 5S is actually a woman who has a show on Netflix, Tidying Up with Marie Kondo. So if you've ever seen the show, it's really cool. Netflix has not returned my calls to do a Lean Six Sigma show on Netflix, but if I did, it would look a lot like this, where essentially what she's doing is she's doing 5S. There's a place for everything. Everything is in a place. She has this rule where you have to be able to see every article of clothing. If you can't see it, you don't know that it brings you joy. And this is like her whole motif, but it's essentially she's pulling right out of the Toyota handbook here. She's pulling right out of the Lean Six Sigma handbook, and she's doing 5S for home organization. And I think it's the coolest thing in the world because it's the same principles applied to your daily life. And if anybody does practice this, you know, you just live it. You know, you start seeing stuff, you start identifying waste, you can't turn it off. And I absolutely think this is one of the coolest shows that supports that. Before I was an industrial engineer, I worked at Wendy's. This is my first job while I was in high school. And essentially, I didn't know it at the time, but Wendy's is like a really, really lean company. And again, they use 5S like you wouldn't believe. So here, you've got a sandwich making shop, right? There's a place for everything. Everything's in its place. You can decrease the inventory because you know exactly how much you have on the sandwich making shop, and you might have a buffer below in the cooler, so that you don't have to make 30 things of pickles or 30 things of sliced tomatoes until you've actually gone through the ones that are on the sandwich station. Likewise, you're decreasing defects and motion waste because you've got things built in a particular flow. This guy is moving from left to right, right? So the meat goes on first, then the cheese and the bacon, then he runs it through the garden with all the veggies. How do they do this? How do they get a bunch of 16-year-old kids to make $1 billion for them every year? Well, they have visual standards in place that says this is actually how you make a sandwich. You have 3 pickles, you have 2 onions, you have 1 or 2 tomatoes. They have these visual standards built into the sandwich making station. And I can even get into, how you actually are supposed to take the sandwich across each of these veggies is actually to reduce motion waste. So they're super lean, and I think it's a really cool example of operational excellence applied to something other than manufacturing. So that's one principle. The other principle I wanted to talk about is Kanban. And this helps us reduce inventory, it helps us reduce waiting, defects, and overproduction. The way this works is essentially, let's say we're in a supermarket, customer orders that last item of ice cream, and this flags, in manufacturing settings, sometimes they're actual physical tags, but they're all electronic now in supermarkets. This signals the people in the supermarket that it needs to be replenished on the shelf. So they go and they take from their supermarket inventory and they replenish on the shelf. What happens when they're out of inventory or below that, but maybe it's not totally out of inventory, but below a buffer mark? Well, that sends a signal to their distribution center that says, I need more. So the distribution center actually sends it now to the supermarket. What happens when the distribution center doesn't have enough inventory to fill the supermarket orders? Well, they send it to the production facility. By doing this, you're keeping inventory levels low because you're not just predicting over here, hey, I need a bunch of ice cream, which has to be frozen and is very expensive to transport because it has to be in refrigeration trucks and whatnot. So instead, I'm just going to wait for the customer to pull that demand from me, and then I'm just going to replenish. And if you can do this fast enough, you can actually reduce the inventory levels while still actually being very attentive to customer demand and even attentive to shifts in customer demand. Obviously, it helps with waiting, as I'll demonstrate in one example. And then again, with defects, it might not be particularly apparent, but with low inventory levels, if something happens in the production facility, it's so much easier to say, oh, it happened at that lot run. I didn't just run and do, let's say I used bad milk or something for the ice cream. I didn't do that for 30,000 tins of ice cream, right? I did it for a smaller lot run. I know exactly when it was, when the defect occurred, and I can reduce the impact to my customers. Baby formula shortage, right? Very, very practical right now. It's happening. What happened? They overproduced baby formula. They created a bad product. It was a defect. They had to take it off the shelves, And then they didn't have this thing set up because they were using mass production and just doing it all with kind of this forecast. And that's why we had empty shelves for a while, was because they didn't catch the defect. They didn't catch the production defect in the baby formula. There's other reasons. I know it's gotten very political anymore, but that's at least one reason. We can apply this to Wendy's again. In this case, what happens is we have a small buffer here, maybe of the Baconators or whatnot. We've got a small buffer that we're filling to order. We're only making these sandwiches when somebody orders that sandwich. At peak times, we might have a small buffer here, but essentially it keeps inventory low. It keeps defects low because we can identify if a burger has been made incorrectly, and we've decreased the waiting time because now we can just kind of shuffle along those. This is way better than producing all of the sandwiches that you're going to need at the beginning of the day. Hopefully, Wendy's or McDonald's or whomever is not doing that. So that's just an example of Kanban in use, both as a supermarket example and also in fast food. So Aaron, that's what I've run through in about 45 minutes here.
Got it. You nailed it, like literally right on the 45 minutes. This is fantastic. We got questions coming. I'm going to get to some of these soon. If you haven't had a chance to ask a question, please do so now. This is a great time. I've got a couple of them that are coming in. I'll probably switch back to the slides to help out. I'm going to start off with something very selfishly. We're talking about these methods, right, of lean principles. I'm always gravitating toward the technological side of things, really, because a lot of times you can put some of these in practice, right, Michael? And then you still at the end of the day can't look back really effectively and say, how did we get better? What did we do? What are the things that are working without some sort of a data trail, something that gives you the blueprint, if you will. So what are some of the more effective maybe software solutions or technologies or whatever that you feel help to understand waste and defects, that part specifically, using data to help make decisions? What are some of the things that you run into mostly in the marketplace that maybe your clients are adopting or you see as kind of a trend in the marketplace?
Can I say SafetyChain? I have looked at you guys, and you're all right. I particularly use Excel a lot. I think Excel has untapped potential on everything I do. And we can automate things. You can pull dashboards and stuff. So I particularly like Excel. I think a lot of the issues that I've faced with that are less technological. To be honest, I think they're more of cultural. We're not used to tracking. We're not used to tracking KPIs. We're not used to tracking yield. So what I've run into is probably less technological in nature and more of we've got to get used to tracking some of these things. But yeah, sure, SafetyChain is great. I will say that you can use that as a soundbite if you want. Yeah,
no, I appreciate that. We're not trying to sell software. We're really, and Excel, by the way, that is a valid way to get started and get going, right? And we have plenty of folks on this line that are probably already looking at their spreadsheets right now. They've got something built. I just want to mention, I'll just kind of plug Michael Parenting Consulting. You have some good templates. You're able to guide people through the process of maybe building something new. We did cover a couple of those templates in the last webinar. So if anyone's interested, I definitely want to be reaching out to him for those. So let me go just in time. We didn't talk about this, but who does this help? JIT, right? Question coming in. Who does this help and who does this hurt in inventory control? That's a kind of a good question here, right?
Yeah, just in time has gotten a lot of flack with supply chain issues recently. So I'll at least acknowledge that is certainly something to take note of. I personally think that just in time is like just the coolest thing. And if Aaron, if you can go back for me to that Kanban example, this is essentially one aspect of just in time. Yeah, it's perfect. If we can essentially, if that production facility can produce and reduce their changeover times between product A and product B and product C, and then we can ship these things out more periodically. Yes, we're going to increase costs, but we're going to be more responsive to changes in customer demand, i.e. toilet paper, i.e. baby formula. What we run into is that people tend to take half measures. Well, I want the low inventory, but I also want an incredibly long supply chain in Malaysia that is sitting on a container ship. And in this case, what they've done is they've taken one principle of just in time, namely the low inventory, but they have not done the other stuff that does come with kind of a more of a leap of faith, right? Is, okay, well, why is that supply chain so long? Why are you loading it twice a year on a container ship? That's not just in time at all. That's anything but, right? Like that's super batch production. So I would say that who does it hurt? I think it could hurt your operational costs if you do just in time correctly. I think you would probably incur more costs. You might select your facilities differently, your distribution centers differently, the more periodic shipments. But I think who it helps is it helps all the businesses, because I think you're going to create better flexibility, better reliability, better operational excellence in terms of being able to adapt to changes in customer demand, because you're polling. It's all about that customer pull, and so much less about that big large shipment from China twice a year.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that question, Matt. Appreciate that. I've got Thomas asking a absolutely perfect question. Thank you very much, Thomas. This is, hey, let's get to the basics. We don't need to buy stuff. We don't need to do anything expensive. His question here is, without hiring consultants, and I'll add, or buying software. It sounds like he's got maybe a budget constraint. No worries, sir. How do you recommend starting your lean journey at a company? Should you train your team and give them a map, make their notes, and then get together and identify the steps that have more ways? He's really like, he's putting something together in his mind. What are some steps you'd take to just give this guy some pointers to get started?
Yeah, I think it's kind of tough. I would say get the executives, get as high up as you can go. You're going to need sponsorship to do this, without a doubt. And I don't mean get them to sign a check to get the sponsorship. No, make them understand that we want to throw resources at that, and a lot of those resources are time and development of people. So I think get somebody on board there, but then engage the front line. Create systems of being able to generate Kaizen, that non-utilized talent we talked about, with the human element, right? Get the people on the floor, people doing the work. Create a structure where they feel empowered to identify issues, submit issues, and then have a follow-up where you can actually go back to them and resolve those issues. So I think kind of crowdsourcing the solutions, so to speak, you'll be amazed. You'll have a huge improvement if you can create that system. And maybe it's a little bit of training for them. Nothing like greenbelt training, but just, hey, here are the 8 ways. Do you see any in your work, in your work experience? They will say yes. They will find them. Yep. And then finally, I would say just go to the floor. Just do that Gemba. Walk the floor every day with these 8 ways in mind. Do the process mapping. You don't need a consultant to do a process mapping. Do these things here. And then 5S is, lastly, once you kind of start that cultural thing, you can do a 5S of some workspaces. Again, I don't think you need a consultant for 5S. You can figure it out. I have faith in you. I think those are some places to start.
Definitely, yeah. And so his name wasn't Thomas, it's Omar. My fault. Excuse me. And something you said, Michael, just gotta repeat it. It's really strong. Omar, you sound like you have the right start already. You're talking about your team, bringing them in. When you do that, empower them to suggest things. Make sure that those suggestions become a part of what you do try, and your team will start to go, oh, wait a second, I am a part of making this better. Because if you do stuff that's just top down, just directive, and only like your thoughts and your processes, people are going to sniff that out quick. They're just going to be like, I'm just going to do what the boss says, right? So bring them in, like Michael said, make them a part of that solution and that journey. So
Yeah, and Aaron, just to add to that, the reason you would want the executive support is when you think about the PDCA stuff. And if you've got a plant manager who only cares about production numbers, right? And you're gonna go and say, actually, we're gonna try to do some things different and learn about our process and try to improve it. If you don't have that support to say that's all right, you're you're going to disenfranchise your people, and they're not going to be willing to try it because they know they're going to get the hammer, right?
Right.
So having that connectivity, having that congruence across the organization, just to say, yeah, that's all right, we're willing to try new things. That's not trivial. That's a big part of it.
It's not trivial. And at some point, Michael, offline, sometime we got to connect, because I'm starting to see in at least some of our customers in the market space in general, in facilities, these plant managers, right? Your VP of Ops, these people, the the old school general manager or facility manager, that mentality is starting to shift. I'm starting to see and hear really cool stuff from plant managers asking for more data, asking for more information from their team, bringing them in, being future focused, looking at growth, saying things like, we can get better, instead of we're doing it the best way we can. Things like that culturally add immense value to the organization and really reaps big rewards. So
That's awesome.
we're gonna have to, we got to geek out on that at some point, Michael, for sure. So
I'm open to it. You've got my calendar.
Yeah. So hey, so WIP stands for work in process. On the screen here, we're looking at that inventory, work in process. I have that right, correct, Michael?
Yeah, that's correct. So this is simply to say that we use the supermarket example, but surely this could also be a manufacturing example, where rather than you having finished products that you're sending across the supply chain, you're actually doing this between different production operations within a manufacturing plant. And then in which case these inventories in between processes would be these work in process.
Yeah. I see it a little bit more in discrete manufacturing, where you have like job shops and then like maybe your shift shuts down for the day and you've got stuff on the table, right?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Batch processing, but yep, that's work in process. Good. All right, Rose got a great question here. I am over several plants. Do you have a template checklist of sorts that can be pushed out to leadership at each plant to start practicing Gemba? Is there a resource we can offer, maybe post here, or maybe something that we can tell people about?
I would like to follow up with that, Aaron. I think that's a great idea. Checklists, check sheets are one of the 7 quality tools that we really should espouse. But yeah, so can you just repeat the question? What exactly are they looking? I don't have anything that comes to mind, but I would be happy to create something. I think it's a great suggestion.
Absolutely. It's just a template checklist that helps to start practicing plant Gembas, right? Like, hey, what's something, she's over several plants. I think what she really want to do is say, hey, start using this. And I like that she's starting with the template to create a standard process of Gemba. So that's the first, you're already on the right track, Rose.
Yeah, that's great. I worked at several manufacturing tire plants, and at one, a French manufacturer that starts with an M, they did daily Gemba walks where they just had the managers walk the same route over and over and over again, and they had a checklist with them, and it was for this so they themselves every single day use this checklist to say, like, are these things in the right place? Are the inventory levels correct, or are they too high? I can certainly come up with one, but I think it would be very pertinent for you to kind of like take it as an idea and then kind of make it your own, right? But certainly, like, looking at things like 5S, everything we talked about in 5S, are things in the right place? Do we have the right barcodes on the machine? These sorts of things I think would be really helpful and important.
Yeah, and really just tracking the footpaths and
Yes.
time at stations and how much time is to just getting really detailed about. Bring your stopwatch. Checklist number 1. Bring your stopwatch.
Yep.
Cool. We gotta. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Michael. Go.
I was just gonna say, and talk to the operator. Don't come through as the audit police. Make sure you're engaging the folks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to look as the cop on the room, and everyone sort of gets nervous and defensive. Like, what are you doing? For sure.
Right.
So last question. Actually, I've got another question sort of from me. So I'm going to go back really quick. There was one slide that I was wondering if you could offer a example of what would be something on the non-value add eliminate immediately? Is there something in your practice that you've run across that you're like, okay, here's a low-hanging fruit, let's stop doing this right now? Is there anything in particular that comes to mind, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I think excessive inventory. I stayed on that inventory slide for a long time. I think excessive inventory is something that people do because it feels good. People, I rather have a buffer of 30 products behind me that I can pull on. But if you actually realize, what that does in terms of tying up working capital, in terms of, your 5S space, I think these are things that are things you can eliminate immediately. I think motion wastes, that's something that a lot of people have within their own workspace to control. Like I said, I worked with some woman who literally she was taking a PDF document of some retirement information, putting it on her iPhone, typing it in, and then putting it in an Excel spreadsheet. So in that issue, you've got motion waste, you've got searching waste, you've got defects opportunities. And essentially what we did is we, turned it into a CSV file and automated it in Excel. So these are things, the 8 wastes really all fall into that NVA unnecessary. You don't need, you don't need to transport, you don't need to create defects, all these things I think are really, really important.
Absolutely. Good. Last question. We're going over a little bit, no big deal. Got Mark asking, he wants to take the course to get my green, then black belt. Do you offer any courses, and what are the costs? There's a good one for you, Michael.
Yeah, I offer courses. The courses that I do are through a university called Siena Heights. We usually do a cohort, and they usually run in the teens of hundreds of dollars. So depending on how big the cohort is that we do, we can usually get that price down. I don't do any black belts. I'm currently developing some content to do that. I would also say that I believe Siena Heights offers their own black belt course as well. I would say depends on what you want. I think there's stuff online that is really good. I think, not to sell myself out of a sale, but Moresteam, Moresteam, I think is a great I think they just do a great job, and there's a lot of stuff online to do that. And even Moresteam, to go back to your first question, Aaron, that is a really cool, they've got some stuff there that they call Steam Room, which is really cool web-based technology to help you do a lot of quality calculations and data tracking as well.
Very good.
So
hey,
I don't own stock in Moresteam or anything like that. They're just
no, it's okay. That's all right. We're good. I love the insights. We're gonna wrap up here. I'm just gonna say, hey, if you haven't, definitely go check out the book. Connect with Michael Parent online. Rose, we'll get you in touch with Michael. That's a great question. I think there's some fun stuff we could get put together for you. Lots of resources at SafetyChain.com. Don't forget, go check out white papers, surveys, videos, webinars. All of these beyond compliance are at your fingertip on our website. We also have a great story about how the global leader in frozen food manufacturing reduced waste and increased production 36% without compromising quality. You guys, this was in a span of like 2 months, and they changed their balance sheet very quickly. It was really, really fun to work with these folks. So go check out the story. And then, we appreciate, again, you stopping by. Michael Parent, this is always a great one. I love your stories. Thanks for joining Beyond Compliance today.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll do it. I'm just showing the book slide again. Again, the book is The Lean Innovation Cycle by Michael Parent. So go grab that as well. So we appreciate everybody's time. That'll wrap it up for us on Beyond Compliance today. We'll see you next time. Cheers.